Chairman's Update. I'm at the WAGOP headquarters in Bellevue, and a lot is going on up here at the Bellevue office, down in Olympia, all around the state. What I want to talk about in this update primarily is our election integrity efforts, our efforts to clean up voter rolls, get more transparency, and improve our elections in Washington with an eye a little bit down the line of getting back to where we really want to go, which is in-person voting, tabulated and counted on the same day with a good solid paper trail of what happened. Now, to get there, it requires several steps. You've probably heard me talk about this before. I have. About 18 months ago, around the time I was first elected state party chairman, we started what we call the Project to Restore Election Integrity, or the Project for Election Integrity. And it's one of the several policy projects that the state party has taken on. And we started 18 months ago really looking at where the issues are in our election system in Washington and where the best places to start good reforms were. And pretty quickly we came to the conclusion that where we could focus on all kinds of things, the real place to start and the place to do the best good fastest was looking at voter rolls. Those are the voter databases of registered voters managed primarily by the 39 counties in the state, but kind of loosely overseen by the state secretary of state. Remember, that's a elected position separate of the governor, but on the same timeline for election as the governor. And the state secretary of state does a number of things, but the main thing that position does is oversee elections. Now, the elections are actually administered and run by the county auditors in the 39 counties, with one exception. King County does it a little differently. But the Secretary of State kind of coordinates and oversees the operations of the 39 county auditors. So we recognize pretty early on that while state law requires that those voter databases, the voter rolls, be updated on an ongoing basis, frankly, they just aren't. And it's very sketchy around the state. Now, some county auditors are really good, and they update their voter databases all the time. Other auditors, they're not so good, and the voter databases can be a year old, can be a couple of years old. And that means that people who've died, people who've moved away, and people who shouldn't be registered to vote in the first place are on those databases. So how do we clean that up? How do we do better there? Well, the first thing that the state party did, starting about a year ago, is we started filing some lawsuits. And we filed a handful of lawsuits that we really thought about it in places where we thought, with the facts on the ground and situations that were particular to a county or to a local area, we might be able to make some good headway. We might be able to win the lawsuit and make some points about how those voter databases need to be cleaned up more effectively. At this point in time, the highest profile of those lawsuits and the one currently kind of in action is a lawsuit we filed down in Clark County that was related to a state Senate election down in Clark County in the 18th state Senate district, where the difference in that recent race was very, very tight. It was about 180, 200 votes separated the winner from the loser. And we found through our research that more than that, something more like 400 or 500 votes, were cast by people who didn't live in that district anymore. So we filed a lawsuit saying that the county auditor down there in Clark County didn't do his job properly and didn't update the database and sent ballots out to people who didn't live in the area anymore. And they went ahead and voted. And they shouldn't have, at least not in that election, in that location. And our argument is, when they're not keeping the voter databases updated, we're getting outcomes and results in elections that are questionable. So we've been operating, and that's just the current active lawsuit. We've filed a number of lawsuits challenging different elements of voter registration in the state, and we believe generally it's not very well done. Another problem in our voter registration and getting on those voter databases is our state's program for automatic voter registration. You'll hear it referred to as AVR, automatic voter registration. You'll also hear it referred to as the motor voter policy. And they call it that because part of it, and a big part of it, is when you go to get a driver's license or renew your driver's license or get a non-driver's license state ID card from the Washington State Department of Licensing, they will automatically register you to vote unless you affirmatively say, no, don't do that. So the default position is when you get that driver's license or ID card, they will automatically register you to vote using the information that you put in for the driver's license. Now, the main problem there is nobody checks to make sure the automatically registered voter is a citizen and legal to vote in Washington. They just register you regardless. And we've questioned the Washington State Department of Licensing. Don't you do any kind of due diligence? Do you do anything to check to make sure a person's a citizen? And the answer is they don't. They think that's the responsibility of that state Secretary of State, the state elected office that oversees elections. Well, the state Secretary of State's office points the finger back at the Department of Licensing, and then both of them point the fingers at those county auditors. So everybody's pointing fingers, and nobody's actually taking responsibility for making sure that people who are registered to vote are actual citizens and legal to vote. This is a big problem, which brings us to the next step we've taken in trying to fix elections. That means repair elections here in Washington State. I filed, in my capacity as a state legislator, what's called a House Joint Memorial. That's House Joint Memorial 4007, which identified this problem in the motor voter policy of the state of Washington and asked the Trump administration, President Trump, and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, and possibly FBI or whoever Trump and Bondi decide to be the best ones to do it, to investigate Washington State's motor voter program, particularly how it's implemented. And if in implementing it and not checking for citizenship status, if they are violating constitutional assurances that your legitimate vote will not be diluted or abridged by weird government action. So it's a federal constitution issue. The 14th Amendment to the federal constitution guarantees you the right for your vote to count and not be diluted in its effect. And we believe that registering people who aren't citizens to vote has the effect of diluting your legitimate vote. This created a cascade effect of reactions. The president recently issued an executive order that essentially requires voter ID, requires establishing citizenship when people are registered to vote. Now, his executive order applies to all 50 states, the whole country. But I think our work with the administration, and especially this House Joint Memorial that I filed in Olympia, I think that helped. It helped sort of show the urgency of the problem to President Trump and his staff back there in D.C. Well, following the executive order that Trump issued requiring baseline due diligence in establishing that people who get registered to vote are citizens, the Republican National Committee contracted with a law firm to contact almost all the secretaries of state or equivalent election officials in all the states. It ended up being a total, I think, of 48 out of 50. A letter, kind of a demand letter, which is the opening act in a potential lawsuit. This demand letter requires that the election officials provide their proof that they make sure people who get registered to vote are citizens. And if they can't provide it or refuse to provide it, there may be lawsuits filed by the Republican National Committee or other entities. So the RNC is backing up our local question here in Washington State in the form of that House Joint Memorial. The combination is, even though it's taken 18 months or so, or a little longer, we are beginning to press this issue from multiple good angles, federal, political, state, onto our local election officials, that they've got to do a better job of that voter ID checking. And this is an important step toward reestablishing, rebuilding voter integrity and election integrity here in Washington. The response from the left wing here in Washington is what you would expect. Our state attorney general, who avoids no opportunity to whine and tantrum and stamp his foot about Trump, has put out this snarky comment about how he's not going to abide by any of the federal actions. Good luck, Nick Brown. This is a lawsuit you're going to lose. Also, our state secretary of state, again, the elected state official who oversees elections, that's a fellow by the name of Steve Hobbs. He's the one who hired the English cyber snooping company to snoop on people here in Washington. He likewise has come out with a public statement saying he's not going to listen to anything the feds say, that he thinks registering people who aren't citizens is A-OK. Again, Secretary Hobbs, this is a losing position for you. Reconsider defending registering people who aren't citizens to vote in elections in Washington. That's a bad strategy. And the rest of the left wing is doing the same. They're Trump, Trump, Trump. They're not paying attention to the fact that the issues we've raised and the pressure we're putting on state and federal agencies to make sure that elections are clean and voter databases are updated are very strong, very good legal positioning. If you hear somebody screaming that Trump's executive orders aren't legal, they're wrong. This is good public policy. And Attorney General Brown here in Washington and Secretary Hobbs here in Washington, if you go to court against Attorney General Bondi and President Trump, you don't have a very strong hand to play. Why don't you not do that and work with us to clean up our voter rolls and start the process of restoring election integrity in Washington? That's the news for this week. There's a whole lot going on, both here and down in Olympia. Next week, I'll probably drill more into the Olympia business. But for now, be well and stay strong.